let's go ahead and pick things up and examine a few more HTML tags. We already have the basic ones in here, the doc type, the HTML, the head, and the body. And we've seen some things that can go inside the head and some things that can go inside the body. Let's expand now upon some of the other things that could appear inside the body. From here, we want to use HTML to describe the intent of everything we put in there. It should say, this is meant to be a header, this is meant to be a section, this is meant to be a paragraph. And every bit of text that we include for the page or other media should always somehow describe what your intention is behind it. When we tell the computer this, the computer can then lay it out and render it in a way that is pleasing, but also fits the particular device that we're on. We don't say, make this 10 pixels wide. We say, this is a header, and it decides whether it should be 10 pixels or 100 pixels wide. It's entirely up to the browser to do that. We will have some control over that eventually, but for now, the purpose of HTML is only to show intent, not to force a style upon what we're creating. So again, we're back at this simple example we started to create last time. To begin with here, let's think about different ways that we can break up our main body. All of the content is essentially going to go inside the body of the document. We could just have it be one large body, but there are actually some tags that exist that help you decorate that body a little more. The first one is called section. Section itself is just a tag. Let me spell it right. Section itself is just a generic tag that says this is a separate portion of the larger body. And usually you want to have everything inside of the section, at least one for your page, but you could have more if you wanted to break things up. Now this is not going to cause the browser to actually do anything different, but it does let the browser know that you intended separate sections. The nice thing about this is later on, when we're working with CSS, we'll actually be able to take advantage of that and make it show something different. But by default, the browser actually doesn't show anything different when you use multiple sections. The other thing you'll note is that if for some reason I don't have a header in there, it's going to warn me. It says, section lacks heading. Consider using H2 to H6 elements to add identifying headings to all sections. And in fact, notice it says H2 to H6. Usually, you want a special type of section for the entire page. In this case, let's give ourselves that. It's called, I'm on caps lock, header, not surprisingly. A header is meant to be displayed up at the top of the page and give some basic information for that page. We'll go ahead and put in our fancy header, which is really just an H1. And we could also put in some smaller information if we wanted to. Perhaps we want a single line that says, something about where this is coming from. CS248 in class example. Something like that. Here under section, we would then want to give it its own sort of header. So let's give it an H2 like it suggests, and its header can be testing text, because that's what we're going to do in this section. Of course, if there's a header, you can imagine there's also a footer. And a footer, just like the header, is a special type of section that's meant to be put at the bottom of the page. Now you can put headers and footers inside of sections as well, so that each individual section can have its own header and footer. Really there's no standard practice here, but most of the time you'll see me just put in one header for the page, so it's a child of body, one footer as a child of body, and then a main section, sometimes several sections, so that we can try out different things. Here in the footer, let's create a little note that just says something to the effect of, we'll do a little copyright kind of thing, 2017, Seth Barrier, me. A typical thing you might put in a footer. You also might have links to sitemaps, to a contact us section. You've probably seen these at the bottom of pages before. Let's go ahead and save this. As before, I could come back over to here and open this up in my browser. I can even just take it and drag it into the browser here that I've already got open. And here's what it's showing me. I've got my big fancy header at the top with the little thing underneath it. Here's the main body for testing text, and there's the footer. Notice there is not a whole lot of structure here, and that is the default of the browser. It doesn't really distinguish from the page header and the page footer to the section in the middle. We would be able to change all of that with CSS, and that would be the preferred way to do it eventually. For now, though, we're just going to let it be as is. One thing that you can do in order to create a little more structure to what you're doing is you can introduce some horizontal lines. These are called horizontal rules, and they are a self-closing tag because there would never be any content inside of it. I'm going to put these between the header and the section and the footer so that I get at least some delineation between all of these things. Then I can come back over here and just refresh this page, and there we go. We've got our header, here's our main section, and here's the footer. Still isn't very pleasing website. This absolutely would not pass a graphic design class, but the intent at least is there, and we can start to work from it. Let's try and go a little bit further with all of this. Generally, the pages that you turn in to me, I'd like them to always have some sort of header section, some sort of footer section, and then don't forget the section tag for stuff in the middle. Now, this won't affect the rendering. You won't see anything different if you leave that section tag out, but it's important to make sure you're structuring your code with all of this in mind. It will become very important later on when we want to be able to style things so that they have their own delineations. That's really all HTML is for, is to express your intent. I intend for this to be a header. I intend for this to be a footer. Even if it doesn't render differently in your browser, it's still important to make sure your intent is explicitly written there. Now, there were a few things I was doing quickly in the background while I was going through this. You'll notice I often like to just use the arrow keys to move around through the code. If you hold down Shift while you're using the arrow keys, you can highlight multiple lines at a time. You can find this very handy. You can also, of course, click and drag to highlight multiple lines, but I'm kind of old school in that I like to use the keyboard to do it all. So you might find that handy. In particular, let's say I've decided, I don't want this section here in the middle. I could highlight all the lines that have to do with the section, and I can quickly and easily comment them all out by holding down Control and the slash key, which is right next to the right shift. If you're on a Mac, it's Command slash. And you'll notice it surrounds it in these two tag-like things. So exclamation point, dash, dash, and then dash, dash. This is a comment tag, and basically says ignore everything between it. It's a lot like the slash slash you might have used inside of JavaScript or C or Java, only here it applies to the whole thing. If I want to undo it, I can highlight the whole thing again and just repeat that same command. So here I'm doing Command slash on my computer, probably Control slash on yours, and that will toggle the section as being commented or uncommented. Always a good trick to know how to do that quickly. That will work in Atom in any language. Notice here, it knows this is HTML. It knows what an HTML comment looks like, so it adds the right comment for you really quickly and easily. Good trick to keep in the back of your pocket, so it allows you to type a little quicker and move through things more quickly. I'm also a big believer in leaving blank space. Here, I'd really like to make the section and the footer and the header stand out a little more. So I'm going to put some blank lines between all of them. That's entirely personal preference. You don't have to do that, and I would never count off if you didn't. I do, however, always want to see you placing things in neat indentation. So here, if something is a child, it should move in one more indent from its parent, always. There are very few exceptions to this, and if I see you not doing this correctly, I may take off for it. I will point out, in fact, there is one exception that happens quickly, and that's the HTML tag. I usually don't indent header body, as most web writers don't. They just go ahead and leave them at the top here, because HTML head and body are so standard, you don't really need to worry about the fact that it's a child of HTML. Let's now try and work a little bit with text and see what sort of options we have inside HTML to make it look a little bit more like what we want. You'll notice when you type in text that it very much takes control of that text and does its own thing to it. It isn't going to just leave it alone. As an example for this, I'd like to pull up a Shakespearean sonnet here. It's just shakespeares-sonnets.com. I think this is sonnet 69. And here we have the standard sort of iambic pentameter, I think this is, or it has a standard flow to it. And the way these are usually typeset, they have all the lines that have that same pattern to them as they are, and the last two lines have a different rhythm to them, and so they're very often indented slightly from the first few. Let's grab all of this right out of here. I'm just going to copy. Then I want to come over into my web page here, and I'm going to delete this part and just bring this in again inside of a p tag. Now you'll notice if your particular browser works right, it should have brought it in this nice basic format here. You'll want to make sure a few things. There shouldn't be any ampersands in it. I don't think there are. Ampersands are always a little bit tricky. But all these are basic characters. They should all work fine. It did keep that formatting where each line is carefully set and the last two are indented. However, and this may not surprise you, if we then go to look at this in the web browser, all of that formatting is lost. Everything is still there. It just doesn't have the line breaks. It doesn't have those last two lines indented. In fact, it lost the lines completely. Web browsers always do this. They take your content and they remove all unnecessary white space and reformat it basically to look like a paragraph. Why did I do that? Why did it do that? Because I told it right here that this is a paragraph, and so it's going to treat it as such. And it believes all paragraphs should be shown in their entirety without any unnecessary line breaks or white space. As another example of that, you may, depending on what school of education you come from, you may know the habit of placing two spaces at the end of any period, or any end of any sentence, or really any punctuation, and then continuing on. It's very common to do that. Now, it's not necessary anymore. There's all kinds of people on the internet arguing about whether you really need to do that or not. But if we put it in here, and then come back over and load this up again, you will notice, oh, don't forget to save. You will notice right here, it removed one of those spaces. I don't know how well you can see it, but there's actually only one space in there now, as opposed to two. It considers that an unnecessary white space, and it removes all unnecessary white space. So, what can we do about this? This is most certainly not how we want our sonnet to look. We have a couple things at our disposal. The first type of tag that will help us deal with this is what's called the pre-formatted tag. In this, we tell it that the text within this particular thing is pre-formatted. That is, it already has been, has line breaks in it, it has extra space that we want you to preserve and keep. It tells the browser, don't ruin this. Everything between these tags should be shown exactly like it is. If we do that and then bring it back up, this does it very nicely. You will notice, however, that it did also change fonts on us. It has switched to what we would call a monospaced or equal-spaced font. This is pretty common. Most browsers will do that. They automatically think, oh, if it's pre-formatted, you probably want it to look really precise. And so it picks a font, usually Courier or something like that, where all of the width of the characters is equal. It did, however, achieve more or less what we wanted. So that's one way to do it. Another way that we could do this is go ahead and leave it as the P tag, but instead make sure we tell it exactly where we want space to occur. There's a tag for this. It's called BR. And BR basically means I want a forced line break right here. And just like HR we had before, this is a self-closing tag. There's no information that needs to go inside of it, so it closes itself. We could put one of these at the end of every line here, and that will at least preserve the lines themselves. I don't need one at the end because the close of the paragraph tag is going to end that line for me. What do I get if I do that? Notice here it's still using the original font now, which is a serifed font, probably something like Times. But it still has the proper line breaks because I forced it to break at the end of those lines. So that helps us a little bit. It is still, however, missing the indentation of these first few. Now, those spaces were there, but because this is not pre-formatted, it's still going to remove unnecessary space, and it considers those unnecessary. We need a way to tell it that those are not unnecessary, those are required. At this point, we have to do something that looks a little bit strange. We want to introduce what's called a non-breaking space, NBSP. And a non-breaking space can be entered by first saying ampersand, which is a signal to HTML that I'm about to give you a special character, and then we spell it out, NBSP, and then you put in a semicolon. This is a required space that cannot be removed. It tells it, I absolutely want this here. We want 2 of them, so we would put in 2 of them right there. Same with below it. Notice I did a little copy-paste action here to make that go quicker. Anything that starts with an and ends with a semicolon is a special character. This is what we would call an escape sequence, a sequence that allows us to type in characters that would normally have meaning. We're basically wanting to give it a space character, but space characters have meaning. They're considered to just be delimiters, and if there's extra ones, it will remove them. A non-breaking space character is one that cannot be removed, and you have no other way to specify that other than to put it in as this special escape sequence. Make sure, did I save that? I did. And now let's refresh. And there we go. Now they're indented a little bit. In this font, we might like to go a little bit further because the individual spaces are fairly small. But at least you can see here how we're getting close to the right effect. There's a few other important characters that are escape sequences. You'll notice something that's a problem here. Everything that starts with an and is an escape sequence. So if somewhere in here I wanted to put the word and, let's see, does Shakespeare use the word and anywhere? Let's do a search real quick. I'm going to do Control F or Command F and look for the word and. There it is. He does have an and. Let's replace this with an ampersand. Immediately it gets a little upset with me. And that's because anytime you have an ampersand, it thinks you're starting an escape sequence, but we're not. It doesn't know any better. Consequently, whenever you want to put in an ampersand, this is also an escape sequence. You put AMP in the middle to mean ampersand, and this will look like a single ampersand when we draw it. By the way, once you've done a find, it tends to stay open down here. If you want to get rid of it, just click back into the find and hit the escape key, and it'll go away. Let's refresh this. Oop, I didn't save it. Save, refresh. There it is. Now my ampersand shows up. It wouldn't have before. It would have gotten confused. Let's do this. This might be a case where the browser actually is smart and figures it out. Sometimes the browser can do it. Yeah, it did. The browser figured it out, but that's not standard behavior. So whenever you put in an and like this, make sure you do it this way. That is the way it's supposed to be done. There's one last one in here that is a special character that I actually just typed out in a funny way. This is a way to do copyright symbol the poor man's way, where you put the parentheses around it. But we'd like to get the proper sort of C with a circle around it. You can do that. It's and COPY. You'll notice that these things often pop up as suggestions as you're starting to type them if you know the first few characters. And now when I do this, I get a proper circle C down there. These are all of the basic sort of text formatting commands that we have at our disposal, as well as commands that allow us to define sections and headers and footers. There are many other sort of little delimiting tags that can be really useful that I'm just going to mention here, but that we won't go into more detail about. I would encourage you, as you want to learn more about some of the other tags that are available, to check out w3schools.com. I've already been mentioning these in the reading. It's a really great place to go. Here I am right now at W3 Schools Complete HTML Reference. And so when you go into HTML here, let's see, the easiest way to get into this, you can go HTML, and then over at the left somewhere we should be able to get into the full HTML reference right here. And just go to the HTML tag list. This lists all the tags. Here's some of the ones that are also useful and that I want to make sure that you know about so you can use them if you ever have need, but that we probably aren't going to work with in this class. The first one is address. Anytime you're writing out an address, it's good to put it in an address tag. This allows, again, the computer to know your intent. It's not going to render it any differently, though actually you might find some browsers render it in italic. And they also may render a line break after the address, but generally speaking, it just gives the intent in there and gives you the ability later on when we're getting into CSS to do something different to an address. Other ones that are important. Article. You can think about in publishing, you might like to have multiple articles listed on a single page. They talk about examples here like forum posts, blog posts, news stories. And so you can put each one inside of an article tag instead of just inside a section tag. And this gives it more information. It knows, well, this isn't just some arbitrary section, these are actual articles. And so that gives it more information. Another really useful one is aside. Now this is when you would have, say on a magazine or newspaper layout, extra information that's meant to be kept off to the side. That is, extends the content but is not necessarily before or after it. Browsers will render this slightly differently, and again it's mostly there so that you can do special things with it in your CSS later on if you want to. If you want to have something that floats around inside the text or to the side of the text, put it inside an aside. Inside of that you could then put tables, figures, and other sorts of things that might be relevant to any aside. In addition to that, we also have the ability to indicate, as I mentioned, figures. So figure here is the ability to pull in some content, very often it's an image, but it doesn't have to be, as a figure that could float anywhere on the page. This might also want to be inside of an aside tag. And so this way you can indicate that you intend for it to be a figure that will allow it to go somewhere else. Now when you're inside a figure, you also have fig caption, which allows you to indicate a caption for that figure that is, again, possibly rendered differently. It is specifically a child of the figure tag. It gives you some more flexibility there. If you're not inside a figure, let's say you're inside of an aside or you just have an image and you want to give it a caption, you have just the generic caption tag. Captions can be used inside tables. They can in fact, that is their general intent. And they go immediately after the table tag when you want to give it a caption. We'll be looking at tables later on, and we might use some of these just in order to be able to decorate our tables a little differently. One last one that might be useful for you in your future and that you should know about is cite. This allows you to define a citation, and it will style that little bit of text differently according to what you define in your styles. And so in this case, you can see here that it wants you to define the title of a work, but you can see exactly what it's going to do. The standard style is to make it italic, which means that it will show up very much like you would normally show a citation in the middle of text. This is not in the actual works cited or references section. This belongs right in the middle of the text in a paragraph. There are many, many others. You might want to scoot through these, just looking at all the different ones that are available sometime. There's a lot, but not too many. One other one that you'll also find useful, I'll mention while I'm here, is nav. This is a way to describe a sort of navigation bar somewhere in your particular page. This becomes much more useful when you're using an actual library like Bootstrap, which will grab nav and actually do some really cool things to it. So we might eventually be using this in a very special way. For now, just keep it in the back of your head that it is one that's available. That's everything we want to talk about for now for the basic sort of formatting of web pages. Make sure you've read about all of these, tried these things out. Next up, we're going to actually work with some more advanced tags.